One verse that has generated a lot of confusion among Christian parents, particularly, it's left some Christian parents sort of sad. Others have said that they really feel like they've been let down by the verse, is in the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 22, verse 6, and it says this: "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." And the confusion and the sadness comes from Christian parents telling me, I brought my child up as a believer, or I took my child to church when he was young or she was young, whatever their phrase is. But then they say, but they no longer are active in their faith. They don't go to church, or some even say they've just left the faith altogether as an adult. And I thought God had promised me that if I trained my child up in the way they should go, that when they were old, they would not depart from it. And again, some folks are very sad that they feel like their child isn't a Christian, and they thought they would be because they took them to church or bought them a Bible or whatever the issue was. And a few have even been sad enough or angry enough to say, I really feel let down by God because of this verse. And one or two have even said to me, I think God lied to me, or asked me, did God lie to me in Proverbs 22:6. So you see the severity of what we're dealing with here when parents feel like their children aren't following up on their faith. It becomes a real issue to them. And so they struggle as they remember this verse or as they rediscover this verse in the Old Testament scriptures. So let me try to address this issue as logically and rationally as we can here, looking at the scriptures. And the first thing we have to say is that in the Bible, there are a number of different things. There are facts, historical facts in the Bible. There's some scientific facts in the Bible. There are promises made in the Bible. This is not an ironclad promise made, but there are ironclad promises made in the Bible. There are prophecies and predictions made in the Bible. And then there's also what we often refer to as the wisdom literature. So the book of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Proverbs in particular is really just that. It's a proverb. It's a set of common sense general themes related to living. And so most cultures have this. You'll frequently hear someone say, oh, there's an old Irish proverb that says this. There's an old African proverb that says that. There's an old Chinese proverb that says that. And we know when we hear those things, we know, oh, well, those aren't ironclad promises. Those aren't tight mathematical equations. Again, they're just sort of common sense general themes. We often run into them when we've done something that's not real common sense, when we've done something that's kind of stupid in our life, and then someone will quote to us a proverb that was basically like, what did you expect to happen? Because everybody knows if you do this, more than likely the outcome's going to be that. So we read the Proverbs. Now, again, there are Irish Proverbs and Japanese Proverbs. The biblical Proverbs, they are God ordained. There's no doubt. They're in Scripture. They are God ordained. But they're still just these common sense rules for living, these general themes about actions and consequences, about attitudes and end results. So we would read them or listen to them or apply them, much like you would your grandmother's advice, your grandmother's proverb. So, for example, if a grandmother gathered her grandchildren around and said, you know, you guys, if you save a little bit of money over your life, then you'll end up being wealthier in the long run. Okay, that's a great example of a proverb, common sense, general theme for living. Here's the thing. Maybe some of the grandkids, they worked pretty hard. They saved their money. They didn't always spend right up to their income level. And they are wealthier. Pick a number, 7 grandkids. And 5 of them are wealthier than the one who chose not to save any money, to spend everything as he made it. Grandma was right. Generally speaking, if you save a little bit over time, then that sort of accumulates and all of a sudden you're wealthier than you would have been otherwise. But let's say there's one cousin, there's one grandchild who just lives a horrible life, spends all their money, has to borrow, goes in debt, then they buy the winning lottery ticket and boom, they're a millionaire. You can't go back to grandma and say, Granny, you lied to me because I worked to save up money and I've only got this much in the bank, and this joker over here buys a winning lottery ticket. Yeah, grandma's advice wasn't ill-timed. It wasn't meant for harm, and it really wasn't wrong. As a general proverb for living, trying to rely on being wealthy by winning the lottery is a fool's game. Working hard and saving up a little money as you can based on keeping your lifestyle intact month by month and week by week and year by year is the best way to probably say you're going to end up a little bit wealthier in the long run. So when we look at it that way, we see, well, God never really promised us, if we take our kids to church, if we buy them a Bible, if we send them to the local neighborhood VBS, that they're 100% guaranteed to be a dedicated Christian when they grow up. The general theme is just, as you train up someone, they tend to do well with that training. They'll tend to take to that training. They'll tend to remember that training for their entire life. We don't get a lot of help. We often do from Bible verses. We look at the content before and after a Bible verse, and it really helps us understand. Early on in the Proverbs, like Proverbs chapter 3, you can look at a particular verse, look at the verses before and after it in Proverbs 3, because it tends to flow as sort of a continuous poem almost. As you get into the latter chapters of Proverbs, and certainly by the time you get to Proverb 22, it's a lot of just boom, 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 different kind of disparate, almost sometimes non-related verses. And so we're not really going to look at the context of Proverbs 22:6. I don't think there's much there. But we can go back and look at, are there different ways that the Hebrew words could have been translated other than train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it? And the answer is yes. One way is that, train up a child in the way. Another word would be dedicate a child to the way that they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart. Or train up a child for the road that they will have to travel. Or, again, dedicate a child for the journey that they will end up taking. So there are a few different ways that that verse could be efficiently, effectively translated into English. And because of how that dedication and training and the journey they have to take, because of that language, some scholars say they actually think this is not related to a Christian upbringing, but this is more related to vocational training. So you would read it, dedicate a child to an apprentice to learn a skill, and even when they're old, they will still find value from those skills. They will still be able to earn a living from those skills. Certainly one way it could be meant. It could be meant both ways, obviously. There's another set of scholars, and I think this is a pretty small minority but there's a small minority of scholars who say, actually, they think this is to be read more in the negative than in the positive. So it's not, if you train a child up in the way they should go for a job or in their faith, when they're old, they won't depart. They're saying, no, they're saying, if you dedicate the child to their own natural ways, if you allow the child to dedicate themselves to their own natural humanly choices, allow the child to dedicate that for the journey that they're going to take. When they get old, those bad habits are going to be that much more difficult to break. So instead of train up a child in the way they should go, when they're old, they will not depart from it, you would say, if you allow a child to be dedicated to the ways that children would naturally choose, being self-focused and being lazy and being undisciplined or whatever your child deals with, if you allow a child to be dedicated to the self-focused ways they would naturally choose, man, even as an adult, you're not going to be able to break those bad habits. They're not going to depart from it. We don't just naturally mature. There has to be some input from others on our behalf to help us mature. So again, some would say that it's that way. And then there's yet a third set of scholars who say it could be either vocational training or it could be religious training. It probably applies to both. This is a general common sense proverb. How you dedicate, apprentice, train up a child when they're young is definitely going to impact them when they are old. But these scholars say the problem with parents being upset that their child is no longer in church is basically this. The word here, this word for dedicate to or train up, is really an intense word. And it involves intense, repetitive, really daily action. And so what they are saying is some parents who are upset, again, because they took their child to church, or they bought their child a Bible, or they sent them to a couple of different VBSs every summer, that doesn't meet this biblical qualification for dedicate a child to the way or train up a child in the way. Again, this is a much more intense, daily, hands-on role model kind of teaching that would be required to really train them up in that way. So even to the degree that the promise, that there is an implied promise, even to the degree that it should hold, that the way we teach people to do things when they're young, those habits and attitudes and skills will stick with them when they're old. Yes, that's true. Doesn't mean if I apprentice my child as an electrician, they're guaranteed to grow up and be an electrician. They may grow up and be a race car driver. But the skills that we train our children in, the attitudes that we help them develop, are much more likely to stick with them when they are old. That's the common sense proverb. But then parents have to question, are we intensely dedicating with hands-on daily teaching and aggressive role modeling of our own lives in order to get that child to not depart from their faith when they get old? So end result is, it is a beautiful proverb. The skills, the attitudes, the discipline that we put on our child when they're young will definitely influence them as adults, will positively influence them as adults. That part is without question. We need to be serious in the effort we put in. But God has made no promise that if you took your child to church on a regular basis or prayed for Sunday meals when you were with grandma, God is in no way promising us that every child who is in that environment is 100% guaranteed to grow up and remain a dedicated, active Christian. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this is Andy.